Meeting has started, so I will let you go ahead.
Ready to go?
I think so. Anil, you can still hear us fine and see our screen?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, well, let's get started. I'm Dave Reuter, Friends on Water. Here's my partner in crime, Brooke Fresher. And welcome to today's roundtable. Haven't had one in-house for a while, so it seems like a little bit since we've done this. We've got some folks online as well that we're working that out, but we'll hopefully have that working for everybody. Today's, I was going to show everybody, I think you've seen the scroll. We've got our partners that would like to recognize. This is how they really helps us to bring content like this to everybody out there. I hope you enjoy it. I hope you find it useful. We've got Kari and Anil is online from MS Consultants today. Sustainable development for resilient watersheds. That's going to be the topic. I hope you got it together for that. That we got it together for that.
I think so. Yeah. Yep, it's ready to go in the background. Once
Okay.
we do your intros.
The current event or the upcoming events I did want to mention. So we've got Stormwater Awareness Week is October 1st through 7th coming up. That's something I hope if you're with a community, you're able to participate. If not, or if you want to know more about it, take a look at our website. I think there's a QR code there somewhere that will be in this presentation. You can access our website at least and find ways of participating in Stormwater Awareness Week. Brooke's got lunch and learn today at 1. If you want to stick around with CWP, integrating your MS4 requirements in advance.
Wonderful.
Saw that, but it's shifted. We'll throw that on some other time too. I wouldn't be a board member without talking about OSWA. Join it. We've got some events coming up. There's a golf event coming up. We've got a regulatory webinar October 1st. Again, if you're looking for any kind of continuing ed credits, check those things out. You can get continuing ed with those as well. So with that, I will turn it over. Kari, you're going first. I take it.
Sure. Yeah, I think Anil, do you have the?
Yep. Sure. So
One moment while we switch gears.
Sorry, in my brain. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming both here in person and also virtually. My name is Kari Mackenbach. I am Vice President of Strategic Pursuits, focus on water at MS. I've been there for over 10 years. My background is in stormwater floodplain management. I'm a certified floodplain manager. And this is my passion. This is something that I've talked about, I think, my entire career. It almost feels like a broken record that I'm always talking about how we can advance our standards and be more resilient for our watershed. I'll let Anil introduce himself here real quick. He is in the office, unfortunately, with a bunch of meetings back to back. So he's joining us virtually. Anil?
Yeah, good morning. Thanks, Kari. And my name is Anil Tangirala. I'm the Director for Water Resources at MS Consultants. Can you guys hear me okay? Can you hear me?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
So yeah, I've been with MS for the last 13 years. Prior to that, it was Stantec. I really, like Kari, really passionate about stormwater management, H&H modeling, as well as green infrastructure. Really excited to be here today. Unfortunately, I couldn't be in person, but looking forward to this presentation. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, before I get started, I'm revealing my brand new blazer. I just got it. Business up front, party in the back. So go Bucks. All right, let's get started here.
Click going for you.
Not working. But where do I?
Yeah.
You want to just go ahead and advance it? Okay,
Well, how about that?
great. We'll do it old school here. Okay, what are we talking about today? An overview of the presentation. What do we all have in common? Minimum NFIP versus higher standards. Everybody know what I mean when I say NFIP, the National Flood Insurance Program standards. The reasons for sustainable standards, Central Ohio Stormwater and Floodplain Regulation Overview. I asked AI to help me out with that. So hopefully my chat GPT worked well. Okay, great. And then what are some communities already doing with sustainable standards? We've given this presentation in a different format at the Ohio Stormwater Conference. This one was more geared towards Central Ohio specifically, and it's gotten a lot of interest as far as, what other communities are doing. And that's really what the intent of this is to capitalize and not recreate the wheel on what other communities are doing and maybe something that you might want to consider for your own watershed. So flooding, it's something that I have had in my career. I was a local floodplain administrator for Licking County right out of the gate, and lucky me, I got to go through 2 giant floods, 96 and 97. That's telling you how old I am. So my first job, and I remember driving around Licking County and people were saying, why is this happening? Why is this happening? And at the end of the day, we always have had flooding, but a lot of folks are realizing that our climate and the way that we are flooding is a little different and maybe a little more robust than we've had in the past. So whether it's Perry County, Franklin County, Licking County, Fairfield County, we all have flooding concerns. And this is just some pictures. This is actually up to the top left is Granville. And this happened, this flood event happened down here on State Route 79 and in Licking County. And it was a pretty significant event, but this type of flooding seems to be becoming more common. I have always talked about the floodplains that we have in Ohio as being bathtubs, and I just never was able to describe it. So I said, I'm going to draw a picture of it just to get the point across. And what I mean by that is we don't have rapid moving water when we do flood. It usually fills in, and then if we have filled in the floodplain, then that water goes elsewhere. And so this is kind of the intent of this graphic, to show that flat floodplains maybe don't drain as fast. And we have that issue here in the state of Ohio. We have that in most of our counties, especially in central Ohio. One of the other things that really was telling to me is, we always talk about the 100-year event, the 100-year floodplain. That's the statistical analysis that we use when we say that, boy, we had a pretty significant event. But this is pretty significant information. We have had 4 1,000-year events in the last decade. 4 in the state of Ohio. So that is telling to me that we are having microbursts and other things that are going on with our climate and our environment. And how do we address that? Because the NFIP that we currently have was really used as and to this day is still used for insurance. Like if you live in a high hazard, special flood hazard area, that's what that NFIP map and those NFIP regulations are for. It did nothing to look at the 500-year event, the 1,000-year event. All these events are becoming more and more dramatic. So the benefits to upgrading your standards, and most communities in central Ohio, and I did it, like I said, I did an analysis through Chat GPT, but have minimum standards and maybe some additional advanced standards. And why I am talking about the standards is because it's the low-hanging fruit of trying to provide resiliency for our watersheds. It's an easy way to do it. It helps to protect what's currently there and then also future development. One of the things that I also like to say is, I am not anti-development. I'm pro-development, but let's do it in a resilient, responsible way. That's really what the end all be all is. So what is benefiting your upgrading your standards do for you? It helps with resiliency to your natural system. It helps faster recovery. more resilient development in communities, and potentially lower flood insurance premiums. Several communities, Licking County is one of them, has a program adopted called CRS. And what CRS does is give discounts in flood insurance because they have more resilient and more standards for floodplain management. So, as I mentioned, the NFIP, it never was intended to be comprehensive floodplain management. It's not. It's an insurance program that in 1978, they said, or 1968, they said, we're tired of the entire nation paying for people who live in high-risk areas. So we're going to make it a self-sustaining program. And those people who choose to live in the floodplain, whether you're on the coast or you're near a river and you just love to live near water, you're going to pay, especially if you have a mortgage. And that happened actually in the 2000s, where they required that if you have a mortgage, the mortgage entity has to guarantee that you have flood insurance. So, I mean, it took that long for the requirement to happen. So we're not talking about minimum. We're saying, look at those minimum standards and maybe what other advancements can you consider? What are the most significant hurdles? Well, you know, I always say a good flood gets everyone's awareness up, and they say, what are we doing? We've got to fix this problem. But at the end of the day, it usually lasts about 2 or 3 months, and then they're like, what flood? So this is a sensitive issue. I understand it, and I understand, you know, working as a floodplain administrator for several years, I understand that development wants to happen, and usually the least expensive land is the floodplain land. So let's just go ahead and fill it in. So that is what we're trying to, I guess, counteract and say there is another way. So you're working with your community leaders. If you don't have support, this is a tough road to go through, or tough road to hoe. But lack of funding, developers. It's amazing to me. The developers that I interacted with 30 years ago are the same developers I'm working with now. They're retired. I'm working with their sons and their daughters, but they still have the same mindset, which is, I can do what I want with my land. What do you mean this green infrastructure? That only works. I heard this one. This is my favorite quote. It only works in California. That doesn't work here in Ohio. What are you talking about? I'm like, wow, did you go to school? So a lot of misinformation out there. And that's one of the reasons I'm up here, is to counteract the misinformation, because the only way to counteract misinformation is with correct information. Other minimum standards, you know, we have subdivision regulations, but one of the things that I noticed with a lot of it was, you know, we're dealing with stormwater like we did 50 years ago. Slap a detention basin in there, put a chain link fence around it, and call it a day. And why aren't we looking at more innovative ways to handle our stormwater and our flood water? So that's one of the other approaches. Is I'm a big fan of the wording, flip the script. You know, you have a minimum standard that you make developers do, but if you say, hey, we have these advanced regulations, we want you to consider this. This is the way we're going to have you do it. But if you can't, then explain to us why. Instead of saying, here's our minimum standards, but we have this cool green infrastructure over here if you want to consider it. They're never going to consider that unless you say, this is what we want. We want you to look at more resilient options. Other reasons for advanced standards, I think we all know this. We are one of the fastest growing areas in the country. Intel really changed things here in Central Ohio, Franklin County, all of the counties around us, change in land use, the increased flooding that we have, both legacy flooding and new flooding, like the microbursts that we're having, these significant rain events. And Anil's going to talk about one of the communities and how that basically provided them the momentum to make some changes in their community. The big C word, not a big fan. I love saying it, but apparently it's not as receptive. Some people don't like the words climate change, but we'll just say that it's things are happening. That's what I like to say sometimes when people say, well, how is this flooding? It's never flooded before. And I Well, we'll talk later. Comprehensive watershed management. I know, working for communities, a lot of people look at the borders or the identified area, the city of Columbus, Franklin County. I look at things in watersheds, and I really think that most of the people here do that as well. So I'm in good company. And then better communication with planners and engineers. I have 1 foot in planning and 1 foot in engineering, and it is amazing how those two groups never talk. Conferences, I'm like, oh, here you are, the planners. Here's the engineers over here. So I would love it if we had more dialogue and cross connect with planners, because these are the folks that are making the decisions for our communities. They're the ones that are making changes happen, or are standing ground, if you will, to developers who want to do some things, both positive and negative. It'd be great to have more relationships and communication between those two entities. There are many advanced standards to consider, but I'm only going to focus on a few. And if you have questions about any of these other ones, I'm happy to talk about them. But these are the ones, and by the way, I will be providing these slides for everybody. You're more than welcome to have all of them. A-zone freeboard, compensatory storage, freeboard, setbacks, use restrictions, and fill. That's my favorite one, is fill. So we're going to talk about that one a little bit more in depth. A-zone freeboard. Believe it or not, there are a lot of places in Ohio, like within 30 minutes of here, that don't have identified floodplains. They literally have streams that just don't have any protection whatsoever. And so in that instance, where there is no detailed 100-year elevation, you can adopt a requirement where the lowest livable structure floor is 2 feet above the adjacent grade. So these are things that communities can adopt to protect their waterways and their communities, even if they don't have a flood insurance rate map or any protection. Not working again. Battery. Try. Hit the next slide, please. The screen first. It was going so well. Okay, compensatory storage. This graphic, I think, has been around as long as me. And I love it and hate it because it doesn't tell the whole story. So I'm going to talk about what compensatory storage. Everybody know what this term is? Basically, you're digging out one area of the floodplain to compensate for the fill in another area. That's compensatory storage. The issue with this graphic is it's, compensatory storage helps to compensate for the loss of floodplain storage otherwise being filled. And this happens a lot more than you can imagine, and especially in Central Ohio. It requires you to do all kinds of things, but what is compensatory storage not? And I finally made a graphic to show, I'm a big fan of these graphics here. So what is compensatory storage? Probably not proper terminology or English, but what is it not? And it is not putting compensatory storage below the high water mark. That's basically the melon baller approach, and I don't understand why development thinks that that is compensatory storage. Just think about it in your mind. When that fills up, that floodplain fills up, is that helping at all to compensate for the loss of you filling in the floodplain? The other thing compensatory storage is not, is outside of the 100-year floodplain. If there's no hydraulic connection, it is not compensatory storage. I feel like this needs to be plastered when people, oh, we'll just go ahead and do compensatory storage. I'm like, okay, this is what it's not. So don't submit your plans and say this is what you want to do. So I'm glad that we finally were able to create this graphic. Freeboard. This is a very common advanced standard that a lot of communities adopt because it's easy to do. So you have, which basically is, it's a safety factor. The irony is when we're having these 1,000-year events, if you're in a 100-year floodplain, chances are you're still going to get flooded. But freeboard does help. It compensates for unknown factors. It could contribute to flood heights. And it really seems to be the simplest advanced standard that you can adopt. And I got some interesting pictures later to explain, because a lot of people have this vision that it's going to look like a house on the East Coast that's on stilts. And that is not what I'm talking about. So I finally took some real pictures to say, this is freeboard. It's not 10 feet in the air, waving in the wind, and you're having wave action issues from the Atlantic Ocean. Setbacks, this is great. And actually a big nod to the Chagrin River Watershed Partners. If you ever want to go to a website and see a great location for all kinds of different advanced standards, the Chagrin River Watershed Partners have done it. This is my favorite one though, because it provides a limited use or development setback aside along a water course. So yes, they have flood regulations, but they're also saying, listen, that's not enough. We want to have the setback consideration, because what do we know about streams and rivers? They move, they change. And so that setback helps to guarantee that you're a certain distance away from the center of that stream or that living waterway. Use restrictions. Restricting or prohibiting use of floodplain, which is dangerous to health, safety, property. This kind of goes in line with the no fill, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in detail. This is my arch nemesis. I do not comprehend why people want to fill in the floodplain. It doesn't make sense to me. It never has. I'm usually deer in the headlights when a person says this is their idea, that it's going to make sense. First of all, if you fill in the floodplain in your residential structure, you're basically creating an island. So great, you're in a house and now your house is protected, but how are you going to get out? How's emergency vehicles going to protect you or come for you? So I wish this wasn't even something that I have to talk about, but I do, because this is one of the most common things that we do in our floodplains is we fill it. And then the developers walk away, and then everyone is stuck with the fill situation. So the NFIP bulletin does, the NFIP regulations don't address fill. They say be above the BFE, be above the base flood elevation, however you do it, whether it's fill or whatever. But this is the easiest route for developers and anyone who wants to fill in the floodplain. So there is another way. Yes, there is. And this is a terrible graphic, but at least gets the point across with, and I have some real pictures, but this is what we traditionally do on structured fill. And then this is what I'm proposing, but not that high. It's terrible, I know, but this is where I'm going with this. This is Wilmington, North Carolina. I was there earlier this year, there for business, and all of a sudden I started seeing all these houses that were elevated. I'm like, wait a minute, this is what I'm talking about. This isn't houses on stilts. This is houses that you wouldn't even know were protected and elevated out of the BFE. So promoting the fact that you can make a house look normal and it not have a basement. That's number one. But you're elevated above the base flood elevation. You're allowing that water to go in and out, and it's not that much more expensive. And I've worked with a structural engineer to try to get some numbers too, because that's the other thing. Well, we just can't do it. Too expensive, too much more expensive. And so looking at structured fill and elevation versus looking at structured fill versus elevation, it's really, at this stage of the game, it's almost a wash. How many more slides do I have? Because it doesn't look right.
Sure, let's take a look.
This is usually at the end. BLR, you did Franklin County.
Yes, the Franklin County.
Okay, go back up again. I'm sorry, guys. Where am I right now?
Plenty checked already.
Okay, I'm good. Okay, I'm good. I'm just worried. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I want to make sure Anil had some time here.
Oh, we have plenty of time. We
And
have plenty of time.
we're good, we're
Make sure
good.
your clickers work.
Okay, so, one of the places that we work is over in Fairfield County, over near Buckeye Lake. Popular place for recreation and boating and flooding. A lot of floodplain around Buckeye Lake. It used to be called Pigeon Roost Swamp. It was famous because it held a lot of water. So, it seems to be the place du jour where people want to go build new houses. And so one of the things that we're dealing with is this low-lying swampy floodplain. When you put in fill, where does that water go? It moves to another location within the floodplain. And people who've been there for 20 or 30 years are like, now I'm flooded. I've never flooded before. What's going on? Well, the watershed has changed because new fill has been placed. So we went through this exercise with them to explain to them and the development community, you can do it. There's another way. And in fact, there was an example that just went in the prior year. And so we showed this to them. And this is an example of an elevated home in North Walnut Township, built in a 100-year floodplain. And they use something called permacolumns. That's kind of like Kleenex, right? I don't want to, that's just a brand of it. But basically, this elevates the structure and you can't even tell that it's an elevated structure. It's protected. The only thing this resident has to do now is make sure their car is out of the way when the flood comes. Okay, here we go. This is the Central Ohio comparison of flood regulations. So, as I said, I used AI and did a little bit of analysis because one of the things I keep on hearing is, oh, these Central Ohio has such strict regulations when it comes to the NFIP, and it's hard to develop here, and that's not the case. I mean, we may have some communities that their processes need to be fixed, maybe more structured way of looking at development. But at the end of the day, the NFIP, the regulations that we are using to protect our floodplains and our watersheds are not that advanced. But here's a comparison. Like I said, this is for everybody. I'm going to give this to everybody who wants it. Licking County, Fairfield, Perry, and Franklin County. And as you can see the comparison, most of them have a freeboard, which I was really surprised about. I was like, oh, well, okay, even Perry County, which, is probably one of the most rural of this comparison, has a freeboard requirement. And the only other thing that Licking County has that is a little bit more advanced, first of all, they're a CRS community currently. CRS is Community Rating Systems, which is a FEMA program that allows you to do more advanced standards and gets people discounts of insurance. And they have a 30% discount across the board for residents in Licking County. That's about a significant savings for folks who live in the floodplain. And the other thing that they have is, I don't know who made this decision, but it's pretty awesome. Back in the day, they're one of a couple communities in the entire nation that looked at advanced development within their floodplain. So they looked at future conditions as part of their mapping. Now, some would say, oh, that's so advanced and that makes it so difficult. Well, if you compare the existing floodplain to the future conditions, it's not that much different, but it just gives folks a chance to have an opportunity to say stuff that's not correct. So I want to set the record straight here. So let me go into some examples of higher standards across the state of Ohio. Anybody heard of Paulding County? Okay, well, it's an extremely rural community, and they have had this in the books for 20 years plus. And I love the simplicity of this regulation. They basically say, hey, our watershed, Flat Rock Creek, is in a floodplain. It's called Flat Rock Creek. And we know that it floods. We don't want any development that involves fill within our floodplain. Simple enough. I always say it's the KISS method. Keep it simple, right? And at the end of the day, this is accepted and adopted, and they've been doing it for years and years and years. So if a rural community can do it, then so can our more urban communities as well. Union County, they just adopted this I believe in 2024, no fill and the is permitted in the floodplain or floodway, and no fill is permitted within 120 feet from the low water in zone A. So they've taken it upon themselves to look at what they want to regulate, and this is a new standard, and they've adopted that. Now, they also have the Great Darby, I believe, in Union County. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So they have some more advanced standards for their watersheds as well, but this was an example I wanted to show. And then Medina County. Medina County just adopted compensatory storage. They tried it out for a year, the suggested option. And then they said, you know what, that's not strict enough. We're not, we're seeing loopholes. So we want to make sure that we are clear and concise with development within our floodplains. We have to have a hydraulic connection to the floodplain if you're going to use compensatory storage. So that was a good example of a community that tried it out, and they wanted to make it even a little bit more stringent because they saw some of the loopholes in it. And then this is the city of Hudson. I'm going to let Anil jump in here. He has been working with them for quite a while. It's an interesting story. Anil?
Thank you, Kari. I guess, I think Kari has covered some of the advanced regulations and why we have to do that. This is another example of a city that MS Consultants and myself and our team worked on, where City of Hudson was trying to, they had no intent of developing advanced regulations, but there was like a real storm back in 2024, August 8th. They were hit by 5.24 inches in just 2 hours, and it really created a havoc for the city, almost to the point where there were hundreds of houses that were filled with water in their basements, as well as several streets that actually had 2 to 3 feet of water. Just put a tremendous strain on the city management, as well as law enforcement and other things, and just became something that for them to kind of go back and realize, well, are we, it's also a community in Northeast Ohio that is developing pretty fast. So the council basically questioned everyone and said, do we have the right regulations? What can we do to be more proactive on some of this flooding? Obviously, as an engineer, and I can attest to this, as no community is going to design for every storm, right? I mean, we all have some limitations on what we can design, but then this kind of started the conversation. If you can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. One of the first things that when the city engineer was looking at this is like, what storm is this, right? I mean, 5.24 inches in 2 hours. And as engineers, we all use something called a NOAA Atlas 14, which is basically a point precipitation frequency server. And this is sort of our go-to table, I would say, for understanding what recurrence interval or a design storm is this. And then when we started looking at this table, for a 2-hour event, and when you have 5.24 inches of rain, essentially we were off the charts, and literally we were off the charts. We just didn't have, a number or storm. I mean, obviously, we could probably extrapolate it beyond the 1,000 year, but this was an event that, Hudson would have never, could have never designed to. But I think the point that came across was like, we're seeing a lot more and more of these events, and some of this is something that they've seen in the past too, but it's become more common. And so they really wanted to understand this. So what we did, if you go to the next slide, is we also tried to extrapolate it, use some frequency analyses and statistical analysis to understand, well, if we have to put a number to this storm, where would we do that? And we try to fit a curve. As engineers, we love this kind of stuff. So, we basically come up with what is that estimated storm that we're looking at. And, of course, this analysis basically told us that it was definitely off the charts. It's somewhere between the 500 and 2,000. Everybody knows hydrology is inexact. Nobody's going to give you a straight number. None of our models, and I have this beautiful saying, which is all models are wrong and some are useful. Well, the ones that are useful are basically the ones that we have good data for. In this case, luckily, we did have enough rainfall data to be able to analyze, what this is. So this was a major event for Hudson. If you go to the next slide, please. I think this is one of the questions we all get is like, what is a 100-year flood? And, I know there's this misnomer about, well, 100-year flood is something that occurs once in 100 years. Well, that's not true, right? We all know that there is a statistical probability for every storm that occurs. What we call a 100-year, can occur almost every year. There's a 1% chance of that happening every year. Kari showed a table previously that showed several communities in Ohio had 1,000-year rainfall events. And I think the perspective of this is I think we need to, the Army Corps of Engineers, they actually, call this AEP, which is annual exceedance probability. So, I think it's a different terminology than just design storm. But I think the point that they're trying to emphasize there is that in a given year, there's almost a percent chance for any of these recurrent storms to occur. Obviously, the 2, 5, and 10-year have more higher recurrence compared to the other ones. Next slide, please. Thank you. So, and I think one of the things that with Hudson we were trying to figure out is, how much more frequent are these smaller design storms. So we actually did a comprehensive rainfall analysis. We looked at some of the gauges. We actually used AI, to be honest with you, and used some of the coding to basically understand what are we talking about in terms of how much more percent increase are we seeing in terms of these smaller events that would, benefit from these advanced regulations. And as you can see, some of the smaller events, there's a 450% increase in how many more events they're having, in the last decade even. So it was pretty eye-opening for the city management to really go back and consider what their framework should be going forward. Next slide, please. I think I touched a little bit upon Atlas 14, but we all know Atlas 15 has been in the talks, and we do have a pilot of that, I believe, in Montana that has been released. And with Atlas 15, I'm not going to go into the detail, but I think there's several additional things that NOAA is looking at with respect to Atlas 15, and then there's updated numbers that are supposed to be published in 2026. Who knows what that schedule is going to be? But I think one thing is sure though is that all of us are going to be seeing some elevated numbers in here. Hudson was obviously realized that Atlas 15 was coming by. They had a choice about waiting for it. The other choice was there are other things that we can do right before we can wait for this in terms of regulation. So that's what they choose to, and then basically directed us to go forward with coming up with those ideas for advanced regulations. Next slide.
And what's the difference between Atlas 14 and 15?
Yeah, so Atlas 15 actually not only looks at some historical rainfall, but also looks at some climate change projections based on future rainfall estimates and then how it fits into Atlas 14. So there's as you can see, there some of those terminology with SSP 5. Obviously rainfall estimates are linked to the heat index and some of the other indices they look at climate change models for. All of those are considered in this new Atlas 15 estimate. So it's basically not only looking at historical, but also looking at future projections as well. So one of the first things as part of developing the advanced regulations framework was to understand what are cities around doing in terms of advanced regulations. I think Kari touched on a few of these, but we really kind of went in depth and tried to make sense of, okay, what is the stormwater design criteria that we currently have? Obviously that varies from anywhere from a 2-year event all the way to a 25, 50-year event. There's also detention requirements. Obviously, many of us follow what's called the critical storm method for detention design, and that varies as well. Obviously, communities have their own detention requirements, and critical detention requirements vary as well. Some of the communities actually promote more infiltration and evapotranspiration, and those are written in the regulations for developers to follow, and others are, are sort of, obviously more detention focused. Some have stream cover protection zone. In fact, on this table, we notice everybody has that, which is great. I think Kari touched on that previously with riparian setback and stream cover protection zone. It's a great tool to have. Compensatory storage. Yeah, that's a big one. Some of the Central Ohio communities have had compensatory storage. Many of the Northeast communities currently don't have it, but are definitely considering it. And then regional stormwater management. And this is sort of one of those tools where we're looking at stormwater at a regional scale, probably at a HUC 12 level or HUC 14 level, and trying to understand how we can solve some of the flooding problems. So I think this kind of gave us an idea of what's happening around with various communities in terms of regulations. Obviously, you can see that it's pretty varied across the board. Next slide. The other thing that we wanted to also understand was, with some of these cloudburst events, there is definitely an emphasis with some of the East Coast communities that are looking at more advanced stuff. So we wanted to understand, well, how are they handling it? Obviously, they don't have Atlas 15 as well, like we do. And so what are they really looking at? So here's kind of like a summary of that. Madison, Wisconsin, they've been hammered with some serious flood events in the last decade. I think there was one actually even last couple of months ago where Wisconsin, actually Madison, had another pretty large event. But again, they have significantly looked at a complete master plan and a regulations update where they're now designing stuff all the way up to 100-year. They're looking at a higher, freeboard and level of service for their infrastructure. So it's obviously that's a pretty battered community. There are other communities, cities like Boston, New York, who actually have cloudburst events, and they look at climate projections, but also looking at advancing Atlas 14 rainfall numbers to be able to see how we can use some of those projections for a higher design standard. So, I mean, obviously this is a little bit more advanced in terms of what is being done, but I think provided us with good understanding of what they're trying to achieve with these cities. So, next slide,
Anil,
please. Yeah.
Anil,
Yeah.
didn't Buckeye Lake have a cloudburst event this summer?
Yeah, they did. Then they actually, it was it in July or August? I can't remember, but yeah, it was pretty bad. I mean, Columbus didn't receive any rainfall that day, but they had like, I
Like
believe
4 inches in an hour, 5 inches in an hour, just that.
5 inches an hour, just over a localized area, enough to put a lot of strain on their system, for sure. So one of the things that when we looked at this, obviously we looked at Atlas 14, any of these rainfall events, and obviously when you look at it, it comes with a confidence interval, right? What is a lower confidence interval, 90% confidence interval, and an upper 90% confidence interval. So what you see with that curve there is a band where you can have a 2.5 inches to 5.5 inches. No meteorologist is perfect, and that's why they never, some of the estimates are wrong. But I think, what we've been following with Atlas 14 is that the middle graph right there that shows the actual rainfall estimate for design. What Hudson was thinking is, in lieu of having Atlas 15 numbers, how about we go to the upper 90% confidence interval and then use that, and I think they obviously compared that upper 90% confidence interval to what other cities have been doing, and other cities who've been usually in that 20 to 25% additional rainfall is what really sort of, compares to that upper 90% confidence interval. So that's what they were really intending to do and trying to see if they can incorporate that as part of regulations. Next slide, please. One of the challenges, and I think this is where everybody is worried about, is, well, there is a cost of upgrading standards, right? Obviously, we look at a standard upgrade like that and go, okay, oh my God, that's going to increase these construction costs. It's not feasible anymore. But I think, and this is something that MS really helped Hudson is we did a study to really understand what does that cost difference look like, right? I mean, are we talking a little more detention to be able to hold back, for example, a 25-year post, a 2-year pre to a 100-year post 10-year, or how much more is that? And so we actually did some modeling to look at a sub watershed level to really understand how much more detention. And surprisingly, it was not all that much. Sometimes it takes that additional step, for detention. And I think this was basically very encouraging to see that with an additional 5% detention over a sub-watershed, that can yield to a much more sustainable, storage in the watershed to protect the watershed with flooding and erosion and all of those, things that we worry about. So obviously that's something that's important to analyze. It cannot be a one size fit all for everybody. It's just one of those where you have to analyze it for your community and see if it makes sense. Next slide, please. So in addition to obviously looking at more standards, we also compile like what are other cities doing? Obviously we have more adaptive controls that cities are using now, and adaptive controls has been around. It's not prominent yet, much more in Ohio, but a lot of cities around the country are currently using what's called a CMAC, a continuous monitoring adaptive control, which basically gives us the ability to take a look at some of these projections and adjust the outlet structure of whether it's green infrastructure or detention basins to maximize the storage level or use more of a master plan of detention areas in a watershed to help with flood mitigation. In addition, obviously, there's a big talk about level of service, increasing level of service. And I think there has been studies that CMAC actually can help increase that level of service for storm infrastructure. In addition to that, we also recommended looking at a flood warning system. I know, Licking County has developed something like that for more, critical structures that flood. For example, I-70, which floods pretty often. They actually developed a flood warning system with cooperation with USGS and National Weather Service. So something like that would be very beneficial. And then using more, I guess, easy to maintain green infrastructure, like what you see on the bottom right there is a design. It was an MS Consultants project in Defiance, Ohio, where we looked at something called a biotree trench, which is basically a marriage of bioretention and permeable pavers, which it still provides that flexibility of a lot of storage along the entire corridor, while keeping the maintenance to low to almost nothing. And I think those sort of green infrastructure practices really provide that resiliency for providing not only flood storage, but also in this case combined sewer separation as well. Next slide, please.
And by the way, there's an example of one of those. I mean, there's plenty of vendors out there that will sell you this system, and it's extremely expensive. And that's one of the reasons why we developed this biotree trench. All it is just a design. And we said, listen, let's do something that any community could do. So Defiance has a pretty robust one that is within a CSO area, and it's been performing now for about 10 years. Very low maintenance. That's the thing I really like about it. So I'm trying to get Cleveland to do something like this. They have so much asphalt and huge sidewalks. I'm like, what are you guys doing? All these, it's like the sidewalks are double the size of normal sidewalks. I'm like, you could put all kinds of stuff in here to capture stormwater. Okay, go ahead. Sorry, Anil.
Oh, you're good. So I think ultimately after we kind of went through this process, it was very beneficial for the city engineer, the city manager as well. But ultimately we presented all this into a regulations update report, and earlier this year, this ordinance was passed. It included some of the things that no community in Ohio really currently has this. So they're very proud of that, which includes rainfall estimates from Atlas 14. They've added 20% more of that rainfall to get to that 95% conference limits for the stormwater infrastructure designs that has been adopted. They've added additional detention beyond what they were doing for a 25-year post, a 2-year pre. They've also added a 100-year post, a 10-year pre, which is in line with some of the other cities that have advanced regulations as well. And not to get into some of the engineering details, but in some cases, developers have been sort of gaming the system with the pre-development curve number value, and I think the city engineer was very critical about that, and kind of basically included regulation not to have a curve number greater than 75, which was important for them, so that they're not really providing less estimation of surface water retention. So that was another item that was tackled as well. In addition, they also have come up with, there were several neighborhoods in Hudson that were basically had no detention controls previously. And now they've kind of incorporated some legislation to be able to go back and do some retrofits, stormwater controls for these redevelopment sites. That's going to help the entire watershed. So what led to this is basically a master plan of sorts that MS is currently working on for a couple of their watersheds, Tinkers Creek and Tuscarawas watershed. We're looking at advanced flood mitigation strategies to be able to, incorporate some of these higher standards and come up with more regional solutions for their watersheds. I think with that, I'm gonna turn it back to you, Kari.
Back to me. I think what Hudson, and it's a very recent example this year, they started this earlier this year. I think what Hudson was able to show us and hopefully show all of us here that are listening is that it's not just one thing. You don't just do a study. You do a flood study, you say, yep, you got flooding, and here's some mitigation alternatives to consider. They went the extra step and they did some of these things on their own. They said, we need some advanced considerations, some advanced standards. So all of that coupled together is going to give them more resilient watersheds. They know they're going to have another flood. So let's make our community more resilient. And I applaud Hudson to go on the extra step. So focusing on the future, what we didn't want to do was tell you all about how they do these advanced standards without giving you at least some guidance on how to do it. So the process for advancing standards for more sustainable development. One of the first things that you need to do is determine what type of flooding do you have? What's the source? How are you affected? Are these the same risks in your region, i.e. do other communities have the same types of risks? Do you have alluvial, pluvial? There's all kinds of fancy terms out there. But at the end of the day, what is your biggest risk? Have you been susceptible to microbursts, or what is your flood risk? And here's some of the examples here. I worked in Cuyahoga Falls, 2008. We put in they had some significant flooding. And when I looked at the flood maps, it's not even identified. It's actually a stormwater. And they were having upwards of 9 feet of flood water in people's basements. So yes, it needed to be mitigated. And it was a very interesting process on, we did a buyout and then they ended up putting in green infrastructure, a very large bioretention basin, or a rain garden, if you will. And it has become an identifier in FEMA Region 5 because they said, okay, we're going to look at this green infrastructure. And it's become almost an example of a way that you can do it the right way, because a lot of times FEMA, when they do buyouts, they're like, you can't do anything with it. The only thing you can do is mow it. And that's not really fun. And it's not really providing any detention or retention opportunities. So that was one of the first ones that I know in the country that FEMA embraced. Awareness of your flood risk. Does the risk intend beyond the special flood hazard area? I think a lot of communities are realizing that this is the case, that as I said, the NFIP is just an insurance document that they use to determine how much insurance you're going to pay. If you're outside of the special flood hazard area, anybody can buy flood insurance, even if you're with outside of the NFIP map. So, do you have additional studies or data to show? This is something that I also want to hit home. As we know, FEMA is kind of up in the air on where things are going to go with that agency. And even on a good day, it took a long time to get updates done to our maps. So can you use best available data? If you have a new flood study that's been done in your community and it shows a different floodplain and it's been evaluated and, QAQC'd and maybe ODNR, the flood division has looked at it and said, yes, can you use that for regulatory purposes? The answer is 100% yes, you can use it for regulatory purposes. So I want to make sure that is clear and crystal clear. You can use advanced information for regulatory purposes. Look at your historical floods. It's very interesting to see in the South Fork, Licking River, when ODOT put in interstate, why am I having a 70? Jeez. When they put that in, the farmers, 1958 said, you're going to cause additional flooding. This is not good. You should not do this. And they said, it'll be fine. The next year, complete flooded the entire thing. So ODOT is currently looking at ways to fix the flooding along Interstate 70 for their infrastructure. They're going to most likely elevate and do some things to get that. If you're in Kirkersville and you're driving east going to Pittsburgh, you can literally see the elevation change where it goes like this. It's one of my favorite drives. I'm like, oh, there we go, going down in the floodplain, and then there's an eagle's nest on the left, by the way. So very cool to see that too. Do you have additional risks related to flooding that your community wants to address? Is there an issue that your community is facing that warrants additional protection or measures? Are there too many potential issues and you need help drilling down to the root causes? Identifying the appropriate standards for your community. What are your long-term goals? Do you have consensus? That's really important. Do you have the backing of your leadership, county commissioner, your city administrator? Is this things that they want to look at, consider? What regulatory measures would achieve these goals? I will say that in Fairfield County, in Walnut Township, where we have done the study, a recent study, they realized, hey, this is only one part of the solution. We're going to put in some storm sewer infrastructure where it didn't exist before. But at the end of the day, if we continue to allow fill, why? All we're doing is we're wasting, first of all, millions of dollars of investment if we're going to allow that fill to go into our floodplain. So they're looking at advanced standards right now to not allow fill. What are your standards? What will they likely accept? And do you have any newer or better data to use? Once you have identified the standards you want to look at the source of your risk. You need to examine the standards that will yield the most change in your community. What is your community trying to accomplish with advanced standards? What is the reality of advancing the standards? I know as a floodplain administrator, you're usually wearing several hats. So the last thing you want to do is get in the fire line of people that are developing. But if you have a need, and as I said, one of the best times to have action is when you've had a recent flood event. Unfortunately, that is the reality. But it doesn't mean that you do it right then. You do it in preparation of when and if, God forbid, that something is going to happen to your community. How does your community balance economic growth with your risk reduction? You can have both. I want to promote the idea that you can build in the floodplain, but you can do it in a resilient and responsible way. Let's do it, and it makes sense for everybody. Building public support it's a very crucial factor in bringing about change in your local regulations. I've been involved in several of these, and a lot of times it's all about repetition, recognition, just constantly saying the same thing and going in and having public meetings and explaining why this is important, showing maps, visual interpretations of why we're doing this is important too. Your community leaders, I'm a big fan of getting the businesses there too, so they can understand why this is important. And it's not going to hurt their bottom line or their pocketbook. They can still develop. And then other influential individuals, as we say, political officials. Identify the obstacles. You're going to know pretty quickly who your blockers are. You know, who is not happy about this and why, and then try to address that with them, explaining why and how this is good for the watershed. You know, a lot of times I know developers have a bad rap, and sometimes it's deserved, but you know, at the end of the day, they come in, they develop, and they leave, right? And we're stuck with the development. So if you can get them to the table to show that this is good for them, and that being a good steward of the watershed is going to pay dividends for them in their development. Transparency builds trust. I'm a big fan of that verbiage, because you know, you're not doing anything in secret. This is a conversation. This is something that we want to talk about for watersheds to provide more resiliency, and that transparency helps to show the clear rationale, evidence that why advanced standards make sense, because it is an easy thing to do, relatively speaking. It's not costing millions of dollars like a brand new flood mitigation project, what have you, but it's something that you can do pretty simply. And then cite other examples. That's why we brought all these examples to you, and there are many, many, many more examples of communities that have adopted advanced standards. Educate the public about the issues and the importance, flood frequency data. You know, we've got a lot of great USGS gauges in there that are telling us about flood events and whatnot. And a lot of people think, oh, it's going to be spring floods, or it's going to be, well, it really can happen any time of year. So I will say that pictures are worth 1,000 words. And when we did some modeling in North Walnut and in Hudson, we compared that to pictures that the residents showed us of the flooding. And you could see a light bulb go on. They're like, wow, okay, I get it. I see, it makes sense. Convincing the public issues relevant to them and their community. We have done a ton of public meetings on this effort, and we're just hoping that the communication doesn't die, and we just keep on talking about how this makes sense for our watersheds. Building public support. When is the best time? Now, or after an event, or before an event? There is no perfect time. Just do it if you can. Strategies for outreach, websites, hosting public meetings, shared information. You know, we did something pretty cool that I kind of forgot about, but then it's been resurrected recently. You know, when COVID forced us to look through QR codes at restaurants, and, you know, when we look at the menu, everyone knows how to use a QR code now, right? Well, wouldn't it be cool if we could harness that technology and a person could use a QR code with their phone and see a flood from the past, you know, what happened before and why we're fixing it with either green infrastructure. So there are some innovative ways, and, you know, the Gen Zs out there are coming up with all kinds of cool stuff. So we should be watching what they're bringing to the table as well. Other approaches to reduce flood risk, stormwater, more advanced stormwater regulations, green infrastructure. I love it. It's one of my favorite things, but it's not going to solve a flood. But what it can do is help with localized issues that you might have. So I'm a big fan of the connection of, does green infrastructure make sense? What is the right green infrastructure to use? It all has a cost. It all has a cost. So looking at that, open space preservation, localized managing districts, flood warning systems, mitigation planning, and then identifying and mapping flood-prone areas. Should be a basic thing, but as I just said earlier, surprisingly, a lot of our communities have no protection. So hopefully we can get those things mapped at some point. Tips to get started. Talk to other communities, You have the Ohio Stormwater Association. It's a great organization to go to get information about what other communities are doing above and beyond what you've heard today. Perform a self-audit of where changes should or could be made. And then what's realistic? I'm not saying, go all the way to what Hudson has done or maybe you look at what you can do. And then who's your champion? A lot of times when you're asking that question, it's usually yourself. But you have to have that person that's going to be in your corner to say, this is why we're doing this and looking at these advanced standards. And with that, I am finished and we can take some questions.
Rest of your time. I guess one thing that I would comment on is, this is kind of my soapbox moment. When I look at the Atlas 14 precip data, you look when that came out, that was 2006 was the last update. They just updated text, but all that data is 2000 and before. So we're already looking at 25-year-old data that we're designing to currently with the way we do stormwater. We had a little study done here locally by OSU to look at kind of what the modeling would suggest. If you take our 2025 date, we're already at that 90% confidence interval level for rainfalls. So everything that, a lot of us look at designs and approve plans and things of that nature, we're already designing with a level of service lower than what should be there. So something to think about when you're looking at plans and developing plans. The Hudson example is a great thing to see that added 20%. I think that really covers and adds some sustainability to our current design practices. These are going in for 25 years. So we're looking at a 50-year time span of these things functioning. It's going to be like in 2050, I think we really need to look, you say, now's the time to be doing this. We need to be looking at these plans. I'm looking at a lot of plans around here. You heard we're rapidly developing areas. So there's reasons to take that into account and say, we need to be putting some resiliency and sustainability into these projects. Questions, talk amongst yourselves, ask questions.
Yes.
If any of your communities, any innovative green infrastructure that's not like the usual ones we kind of think about?
Say any unusual
Any
green?
usual or innovative green infrastructure components?
Well, I love the biotree trench, of course, big fan. Of course, we didn't patent it, so anybody can use it. So I'm still talking up here, not rich in anywhere, but I love that because it's a very basic design that anyone can do. And one of the things that we're really good at is covering things over with asphalt. Well, if we can take some of that away, we don't need it. We call this thing in the industry called road diets, where they do traffic studies and they say, we don't need these 5 lanes anymore. The community has shrunk. Let's take back some of that. And that would be a perfect example and an innovative way to capture stormwater. And in defiance, the maintenance, when we designed that, we actually designed it. Well, I'll tell you the story. I was working in Louisville, Kentucky, and we were looking at all different types of green infrastructure with the EPA. We use this thing called a CRADA, which stands for Cooperative Research and Development Agreement. It's a mechanism that federal governments can use to help with innovative technology. Typically, it's used for, hey, I designed this widget that cleans water better, so we're going to put it in a wastewater treatment facility, and the EPA helps you beta test it. And so we did this with green infrastructure in Louisville. And one of the things we did was we designed tree boxes that were interconnected. And a couple of things we learned. One thing is that the tree boxes were tree commons. Trees did not live because they were not able to spread their roots. And then the interconnection didn't do anything. So I'll save you the trouble. Don't bother with that. So that design came off of that technology of looking at interconnecting tree boxes. Why do we have a box at all? The tree is a living being, but it can be replaced. It's part of the system. And so we have a clean out mechanism, and then we also allow for the pervious pavement on top. But one of the things we didn't know was a lot of community trucks. City of Columbus told us, well, we park our utility trucks on top of the sidewalks all the time, so it has to be robust. So that came part of the design as well. That was innovative. We did a very interesting permeable pavement design in Pittsburgh. Well, I was told in Pittsburgh that we can't do green infrastructure here because we have hills. And so we designed a permeable system on Anil, what was it? What
Was
was
Del
the grade-
Rose?
What was the grade
Yeah.
slope on that?
It was like 8% slope.
Typical Pittsburgh
So-
street. And so stormwater or rainwater hits that system and goes like a bat out of hell down that street. And we said, how can we capture it? Because it's just gonna go right by. So we put in a check dam system underneath to slow the water down and to infiltrate. That's been in place for 10 years. And it's been proven that you can do it, you know, in Pittsburgh. So a lot of times in green infrastructure, we're dispelling myths, right? Bio-infiltration is the most expensive because of the level of service and cost of service that you have with that. But there are other ways, you know, and I'm a big fan of getting away from your computer and going out to the community or the place where you want to place the green infrastructure and figure out what is going to work the best. So those are just a few examples. Columbus has a ton of great examples through Blueprint Columbus. There's one that I love, I love it because I get to go see it a lot, is over off of High Street behind the post office. There's like a large permeable system. But there's all kinds of technology out there. I'm sure if you go to the Columbus's website, you could find the technology. But
Hey, Kari, if can I add something there? So,
please.
MS, we recently finished a project with Blueprint Columbus Hilltop that actually, I just received pictures yesterday that actually have a couple streets we're converting to permeable pavement. And then several of these pocket parks where city bought land bank parcels as part of the land redevelopment office, contiguous parcels, and then did this pocket green infrastructure. If I may, I can share some of those pictures. Actually, I do have that. It's really,
Sure.
it really came about so well that I think the city just had a walk yesterday. So I'm going to try to see if I can share, if that's okay. So this is one of the streets where we're doing permeable pavement. Can you see
blow it
this?
out? Can you make it
Yeah.
bigger?
Is this better or?
It's kind of tiny, like a little.
I know. These are taken on the phone.
Okay.
On the phone. So my apologies. But anyway, this is in Hilltop area. We've been working on this for the last decade even. And I think what you see is permeable system here. It's interlocking pavers. Underneath this is obviously, we have different layers here to be able to treat and improve water quality. What we also have in here is a resiliency where there is like large, giant relief sewers underneath that actually help with flooding. So not only is this helping with water quality and some of the localized drainage, but we're looking at it at a system level. Here's a street, which I think you can see it's still in construction, but we're actually pitching the street towards a median and then creating a bioretention cell in the median. So pretty, I mean, it's really nice to kind of see it all coming together. It's a massive project that is not only doing pavers, but also I want to get to some of the pocket park areas. This is an example of a contiguous parcel where they've developed bioretention cells in the pocket park. Kind of a concept where cities trying to maximize bioretention in these areas. Here's for how they're connecting, basically the drainage from the roadway gets to the bioretention cell. One of the things I would say is if you get a chance, OSU and Ryan Winston have actually done a recent study where they've proven that aged bioretention is actually, with age, bioretention cells are actually improving their water quality capture as well as water quantity control as well. So I would advise that you read through that research the communities about it.
We can try
but-
to send it out to everybody.
Yeah, I was gonna say, and now maybe at the bottom there, it looks like we're seeing your File Explorer
Yeah, all
screen.
we see is your
So
file.
maybe at the bottom of the screen, looks like you might have an image
Oh.
highlighted at the bottom.
I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
That's, yeah, thank you. That's what.
There we go.
Okay, so it was my other screen. My bad. I guess. Sorry. So anyway, yeah, some of the pictures of the bioretention cells here in this neighborhood. This was that inlet, that we were doing, and yeah, this is fresh off the press. The contractor just sent it to me yesterday. This is that permeable pavement interlocking pavers. It's on Richardson Avenue and Wayne Avenue and Hilltop area here in Columbus, and we actually had a big discussion about this. It's like the city. I mean, this is that boulevard area, right? This used to be like a boulevard. Right now, everything is being pitched towards the boulevard, and there's going to be a giant bioretention cell with a lot of storage that's going to come about here as well. Try to see. It's another picture of permeable.
And Anil, so what the city, we were fixing things with the bioretention, but we weren't completely fixing the flooding. And, it would be a travesty to put in all this green infrastructure and there still be flooding. People go, well, I thought that was going to fix that. So when Anil mentioned they went ahead and upsized the pipes underneath to provide that storage. So visually the people see the green infrastructure, but it's an integrated system. And this was, I think, the first blueprint project. There are several, but this was the first one that said, we can integrate our systems. We can upsize. It won't cost that much more. And let's go ahead and provide that storage. So this is an innovation. I feel that we're learning from how we're putting in this green infrastructure. Go ahead, Anil, if you have anything else.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that must be all. Like I said, it's
And
a
don't those
project in
vertical
progress.
pavers look nice? I mean, a lot of these communities had brick streets and then they paved over them because that was the way that we did it back in the day. So to bring the visual back, and it's just a nice
Right.
system that captures that stormwater, it's great. And the cost has gone down. Permeable pavements was super expensive, but now we got more vendors in there. So now it's just engineering 101. More people come into the system and the cost goes down.
Agreed. So anyway, wanted to share some of the examples, pretty recent examples here in Columbus too.
Any more questions?
Not seeing anything coming through the chat, but folks, if you're online and you want to unmute yourself, I'll give you a minute here to do that. We do have pizza for the in-person folks has arrived as well, so we'll let you get up, or you can get up now if you want and start grabbing some pizza while we wait for more questions.
I got a question. Do you see any municipalities in their compensatory cut bill just changing the ratio when they're allowing that development so they can still allow development, but then still get some additional cut back out of their floodplains? Like, it seems like a really easy fix to say, hey, we'll allow development in this area, but it's a 50% or a 2-to-1. Especially in places that are known issues where they were allowing fill without any cut. You can kind of compensate for that. It seems like a really easy
Yeah.
subdivision fix that can.
Anil, do you know of any?
And there's several communities that have compensatory storage as part of the regulation. I think right now, really the ratio has been 1-to-1, right? I mean, the challenge has been trying to do a compensatory cut right. Like Kari said, what happens is most of these compensatory cut areas are either way above where it's not a hydraulic connection, or they're below the ordinary high water mark, which really does not provide that value. So I think it strategically needs to be placed on the site that provides value. And that's where, we need to look at a model and understand what the benefits of compensatory storage are. But it's possible. And we've seen like City of Columbus obviously has a compensatory storage regulation that's been used, and so does I believe Licking County does that too right now. Sorry, I don't know if I answered your question, but I'm not aware of any community that has like 2-to-1.
Kind of sort of.
Yes, yeah, I mean, it's whether it's a local regulation or not, raising and filling in flood areas is an Ohio drainage law issue. where you're affecting upstream, whether or not it's studied or not studied. And we've run across a lot of places, especially in Delaware County, where people are putting in brand new roadways. Cities, municipalities are filling in floodplains and they're doing nothing about it. And upstream farmers, whoever else are experiencing flooding, have the right to sue these folks who are doing these designs and municipalities very easily. They're not, because it's hard to see, but I mean, it's not happening just with development. It's happening with municipalities building roadways through areas that are flood prone.
Yeah.
We see a lot of it with just residential development or small development, it's kind of like the death of 1,000 cats, you get this one little area that's filling in. Now, it always gets wet on my property. I'm gonna fill that in, push the dirt out there, get that filled. It's hard to police. You don't find it until maybe it comes through for zoning at some point, rezoning. That's when you start picking those things up. It's like, hey, where'd all this fill come from here? That's tough for municipalities to police.
That's one of the reasons with the pictures and whatnot, is to show that there is another way. And it's not so egregiously expensive that it's out of the blue. You can do this, you developers, you can do floodplain development, not a fan completely, but still you can do it. But let's do it the right way. And let's not bring in that fill and really harm who's already there. And yeah, I agree with you. It's a hard thing to police, especially when it's just a new road, what's the big deal? That's not structure. That's not anyone at risk. It's like, well, yeah, now that has contributed to the change in the way that our floodplains is flooding.
It's everyone upstream's problem.
Right. Yeah. And at the end of the day, it does come down to, you've caused me flooding, so I'm going to sue you. That's stormwater unfortunately.
Yep.
So at the very beginning, you said Central Ohio had 4 1,000-year storms in 10 years.
Yes.
And, I may be simplifying the math here, but so does that mean that what we call right now a 1,000-year storm is really closer to like a 2.5-year storm, at least over that 10-year period? So ultimately, my question is when we're defining base flood elevation, we're obviously, based on the current data, we're not being accurate enough. We all know that, but it's not like the regulatory procedure. So is there any way to estimate what is actually the 100-year base flood elevation based on the real data, not what NOAA 14 says?
Well, you just gave Anil in to say, well, you need to do a model. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think I think you're absolutely right. And yes, we should all be concerned about, the data we have is old, and then what's depicted on the maps is old. So we have to really address that in a way, which is why I think what I showed with Hudson, they were thinking ahead of, okay, I'm not going to wait for Atlas 15. I'm going to look at a higher confidence interval and go with that. Obviously, I'm going towards a path where I'm at least I know what my risk is with these. And so, yes, the answer is yes, we can develop those. There's technology out there. There's enough rainfall data. At this point, we have several, I think most of the big cities at least have almost 100 years of rainfall data that we can use to be able to develop these. Now, I will say that it needs a lot of motivation because, Licking County back in the day did what's called a future flooding, and future stuff. And that's based on hydrologic analysis, based on, what if I had more development and I increase my rainfall by, or my runoff estimate by 20%. I think there's another layer to that right now with, well, not only do we have to increase development pressure that's going to increase runoff, but our rainfall estimates have gone up too. And so it's a double whammy, so to speak. And I really wish that Atlas 15 is in place because at least it'll help us plan things. But at the same time, there's also a concern with costs and how much costs are going to increase with that. So we need to all think about this and talk to each other about what is the best thing for us to do in terms of this rainfall data.
Yeah, the 1,000-year thing, when Anil showed me that, I was like, wow, that's some shock value, right? To say that within Ohio, we've had 4 of them. Now, those were almost all microburst, but still, that was, it says to me that the data is the data. And no one can argue that it's not happening. We have the proof. So, as Anil said, we just got to keep, as stewards of our watersheds and knowledgeable people, we need to tell our neighbors and tell friends that this is real and we need to talk about what we should be doing and what were we leaving as a legacy to our children and our grandchildren. I don't want watersheds that have had more flooding and more problems. I'd love to, if we could live in harmony with our floodplains and do the right thing for development. Any other questions? Good. And like I said, we'll have it available. You'll have access to this PowerPoint.
Yep, I'll follow up with with those after here with the certificate of attendance as well. If you missed hitting the sign-in sheet when you came in, please make sure you put your initials next to your name or put your name down if you weren't on there. And I guess Dave has anything else for wrapping up
I don't
here?
think so. Well,
Thank you to everybody online.
Yep.
Yeah,
Everybody here, go get some pizza. Sorry, people.
yeah.
Thank you all. Appreciate it.
See you later.
Thanks, Anil.
Thanks.
See ya.
So continue the conversations. And
And like I said, we will, if you want to hang around until 1 o'clock, we're going to be screen sharing that CWP luncheon. So you're more than welcome to hang out, do some remote work from here if you want.
Yeah.
see, you found pizza already.
I do know that.